Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another episode of Way of the Warrior. My name is Trevor Martin, and I am the host, of course. And if you've been following along, you know that I like to go out on the social media and I like to find badass individuals, warriors, if you will, that are sharing a message of hope, sharing a message of goodness, of kindness, and pushing back against the darkness in this world. And I'm already smiling because I cannot contain. I'm so excited. So I have with me today Gretchen, and Gretchen, thank you so much for being here on the show with me.
Trevor, I'm super excited to have a conversation with you. Every time we talk, I learn something new.
Hey, hey, right back at you. And I don't. I think I'm gonna have this grin on the entire time. I think back to some of the conversations that we've had. Obviously prior to this, and your mentality and the way that you view things, the way that you go through, actually, just the way you view the world and the way that you walk through the world is inspiring, it's motivating, and it is just, I am in awe of how you are you. And we talk about, usually on this show, we talk about past, present, and future, like obstacles you've overcome, things like that, right? And we talked about going over your book called The Work in Between, a memoir about stepping out of the shadows. And audience, this is the book, and you need to get it. It is on Amazon. There'll be a link that's going to pop up here. You need to go ahead and click on that link and go get yourself a copy. And please make sure you leave a review because it's badass. So instead of doing the whole past, present, future, Gretchen, I wanted to talk a little bit about the book, and I'm going to kind of turn it over to you. And if you could talk a little bit about what you currently do, like what you do now, and then tell us how you got started on the journey to write this book.
Sure, thank you. So what I do now, I'm actually an associate dean in a medical school, and which I love. It's my dream job. But what got me to write this book was that I kept getting people asking me where they could find my book. And I'd never written one. So I would post on LinkedIn and I would post on Facebook and I would have different conversations. I'd give talks. And the one thing people would ask is, where do I find your book? And for the life of me, I could not figure out why anybody would want me to write a book. That made absolutely no sense to me. But, my story in a nutshell is I grew up in an alcoholic home, and anybody who's grown up in a home where there's addiction or dysfunction or whatever understands that we build our coping strategies at a very young age. And they're not just coping
Great.
strategies, they're survival strategies, right? And what works really well within that environment doesn't necessarily work that great once we leave that environment. I will say I grew up with a lot of love, very close to my family, but my dad was a drinker, which meant our growing up, my childhood was very uncertain. There was a lot of anxiety. There was fear. There was embarrassment, all the things. And I learned many, many, many decades later that you can only be so sad, so angry, so scared, so embarrassed, so anxious, whatever, for so long before you have to make yourself feel better, especially if you're a kid and you have
Yeah.
like no control over anything. So I started, I turned to food. And because I knew I didn't want to drink, A, I was too young, but B, I saw what it was doing to my family. I was too afraid to take drugs. And pretty much everything else was not really an option. So I ate. And so I was an overweight kid. I became an overweight adult. I became an obese adult later, and then a morbidly obese adult. And I spent my whole life trying to lose weight. And then I'd gain, then one day out of the blue, I would stop, and then I would gain all the weight back, and then I'd beat myself up, and then, then I'd give up hope, and then, 6 months later, I'd do it again. And you just rinse and repeat that for my whole life. I had been diagnosed with cancer the first time when I was 30, and I would be diagnosed two more times. And so you would think, having gone through cancer three times, that I would that would be enough motivation to get my life together, to get my health together. And I tried. I really tried, but I hadn't really looked at what was why I was self-soothing with food. I mean, I knew it started at a very young age, but I didn't know how to do anything differently. And I finally figured out when I was diagnosed diabetic, which scared me way more than any of the cancer did. I realized that I needed to do something pretty serious, and I better figure out why I was still self-soothing with food and how to change those strategies. So I did, and I lost over 100 pounds, and I talked about it a lot, but not because I looked better, though I did, and I do. It was more about the transformational journey I went on in order to do that. And that's what the book is about. And one day I just said, fine, I'll write a book. And though I had no idea what I was going to write about, I thought, what would even be interesting? And I don't say that in a way where I'm looking for accolades. I just thought, I don't find anything that I've done that interesting. So, because much of it was survival skills, you know?
Yeah.
So that's why I sat down and wrote the book. It took me over a year, and I cried through half of it and laughed through half of it, and took out most of it. Published a book. And so I've been really happy because people who have read it have felt that it resonated with them, that the messages, were real. And so if I get people when they read the book to go, I get it, and
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. And if I give people hope, then I've done my job.
Yeah, so we talked about a little bit before, before I hit record, we talked about there's books that are written that I'll read. And folks, listen, and Gretchen, I'll say this again too, in 2025, I would say that this book right here has got to be one of my favorites, if not my favorite for 2025. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to say why. Again, so I write, I read, whatever, draw, and there's things that just move you. There's things that you read and you go, oh, that was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I get what the message is. And then there's books that move you. There's books that you feel like you can tell that the authors put their heart and soul into the book. And the work in between, I mean, like I could feel that. I could feel the heart and soul that you put into it. And when 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 a book has that type of impact, for me, it means that I've absorbed the content and now I can go apply. I can take action based off of what I've read here. And I want to go through, I've got some favorites marked here. Um, and the first one is actually the message that you wrote to me in inside the cover. Trevor, when we lift each other up, we all rise. Gretchen. And it's a very, very, very simple statement, but it's much better, obviously, to practice lifting others up instead of tearing down. And I will thank you for being there for me when I needed it in conversations and for lifting me up. I absolutely love the conversations that we've had and will continue to have. So thank you for that. Um, so page 3, and we talked about this before, like it hit me like a ton of bricks. I actually stopped reading for a little bit to just um absorb the words because there's 4 of them. And it just says at the bottom of page 3, you say cancer, period. I had cancer. And you could just flip the page and go on to number 4, like, okay, yep, she got cancer. But it's the way, not spoiling how you open the book, but it's the way that at the end of the page it just hits cancer. I had cancer. So I sat back and I thought, okay, this is me. How do I feel when somebody says you have cancer? and I couldn't shake it. Like just the feeling of like I'm sweating right now just talking about it because the feeling of dread. And you pointed out that you would be diagnosed a couple more times. And we talked about the ups and downs, like the hope, like, okay, in remission, I'm going to be okay. And then boom, here it is again. And then here it is again. Um, the weight of that, how did you even begin to process that?
So the first time I had cancer, I was at work at night, and the doctor called me on the phone and said, the biopsy came back and you have cancer. I'm sorry. Call my nurse tomorrow and she'll set up an appointment. And I hung up the phone and I knew something was wrong. I frankly found the tumor. And I knew that there was something serious going on. And I think we can try to figure out how we're going to behave or respond when we get bad news. I don't think any of us has a clue how we're going to respond when we get bad news. I it was weird because I talked about it. I kind of told everybody. I'm like, I have cancer. I mean, and in some weird way, I think I was doing this whole magical thinking thing where I thought if I talked about it, I would maybe reduce the power it had over me or something. I don't know. I've never been one to
Hmm.
shy away from having hard conversations. And I always had conversations about things that make people uncomfortable. I don't know why.
Yeah,
I just do. But, well, I do know partly why. I learned a long time ago that I cannot carry this all around myself because it makes me physically ill. So growing up, I had to talk about my my home life, my dad's drinking and well how we had to leave in the middle of the night and go live with grandma and how it was disrupting school. And instead of keeping all of that inside, I was incapable of doing that because it literally gave me a stomach ache. So I've always talked about stuff that's uncomfortable. And I probably told everybody I knew. In fact, I told the guy in the elevator, my coworker in the elevator on my way home, um, because he said, "Are you all right?" And I'm like, "No, I have cancer." And he was like, "Oh." I'm like, "Well, what else does one say?" I mean,
truth.
that's a
Yeah.
heavy thing to share with someone you don't even know that well. But most people will tell you if it is a serious cancer for sure. But the minute you are told you have cancer, there's kind of like everything that happened before you got cancer and then your life after you've been diagnosed. And once you're told, typically you don't really pay much attention to anything that is said afterward because you're trying to process it. It doesn't make sense. And you don't even know what it means, right? Because you don't know how
Yeah.
serious it is yet. You don't know what kind of treatments you're going to need. You don't know how it's going to affect your life. There are some cancers you get that you're like, well, this is really uncomfortable and kind of miserable, but I'll get through it. It'll be all right. And there are others that you don't get through it at all. And so at the very early, diagnosis, you have no idea how to process it because you don't even know what you're processing yet. It is those small steps that happen afterward where you learn to process it and realize, well, now I got to figure out how bad is it and what are
Yeah.
my options and where do we go from here? And that's where, the doctors and nurses and everybody will typically help you walk through that or family. And so if anyone thinks I went through all this alone, I did not. I had tons of people who carried me through all this, even though there were ultimately when you go through treatments or scans or all those things, you have to do those things by yourself. And some of those things are very, very, very scary and painful.
Yeah, I'm glad that I agree 100% agree that when we're hit with that, we don't know how we're gonna, we don't know how we're gonna react. And then, you can think about like, you know what, I think I would do this, but you don't really know. You don't really know when the words hit the ears. and then of course the whole process of the whole process of processing, excuse me, of that information. I can't even. It just I wonder, the elevator story to me, really sticks out. Like, hey, you okay? No. Well, I know I have cancer, right? Just that the weight of just that simple conversation, and I think I'm sure at that point in time, it's as you're saying it out loud, like, oh, this is actually a real thing. This is happening. Um, it's interesting, Gretchen, as you go through the book here. You found out, page 3, you've got cancer, and then you go through some other things within, obviously, as you're moving along. And I get to page 76, and you make this, which is crazy. I'm reading this thinking of having read some of the things that you've gone through, and you say, we make a lot of assumptions in our lives, but carrying out our loved ones' last wishes should be based on their preferences, not ours. And the reason why I've highlighted this statement right here is because you've found out that you have cancer, right? And a lot of other things going on in the book. Yet you're not selfishly thinking about yourself and what you're going through. You're talking about carrying out another loved one's wishes. It's about somebody else, which a big chunk of this book is parts of it, right? And that stood out to me because I thought about myself, and I'm sitting here thinking, if I was going through the same thing, would I be selfish? Would I be like, I have cancer. I need to think about me. I need to think about my healing, what I'm doing, how I get better. I'm sorry that you're going through what you are, but I've got to focus. I got to focus on me. And that vibe is never. It's not in this book. And for those of you that don't know Gretchen, you need to know Gretchen, you need to get her on your roster ASAP. You will find out through conversations that she's simply just not made that way at all. But that line, Gretchen, really that hit me pretty hard.
Well, for anybody watching or listening, I was cancer free when my mom passed. And what I'm talking about in the book, and I don't know that that would have mattered anyway, to be honest with you, because I was really good at putting my what was I was going through um last. I mean, I never wanted to inconvenience anybody. That just was part of my way I operated. And I have since changed that. I'm really good at inconveniencing people now, which is actually a little healthier for me. But with my mom, I mean, because we had lost my older brother so young, he was 32, we weren't afraid of having these hard conversations around life and death. And so we were very aware that life was fleeting, that life was short, and we had to really respect what everybody wanted. And so in my family, we had those conversations. I will tell you that the year we lost my older brother, my aunt lost 3 of her 5 boys. They were all in their 30s. Every 3 months,
Mm.
we were burying a young man in the same cemetery in my hometown. And in fact, that was the same year I got cancer. So that was a really bad year. The only good thing that year is I graduated from college after taking 13 years to get a bachelor's degree because I had to take one class every other semester because I was the first one to ever go to college. So the one thing we never took for granted was life. And as my mom was getting older, as my dad was getting older, I had a better relationship with my mom. She would have, you think I have uncomfortable conversations? My mom was she didn't hesitate at all. She went for the hard stuff. And I remember one day I was helping her make her bed, And she said, I need to talk to you about my funeral. I'm like, now? And she's like, I can't talk to your younger brother, Eric, because he'll get too upset, so I have to talk to you. I'm like, okay, Mom. So we're making her bed. I'm in tears, and she's telling me what she wants. And I can promise you, if we did not do what she wanted, we knew we were going to be in trouble, whether it was in this life or the next one. I don't know, but we had no choice. And if you really love somebody and you really respect them, you have those conversations, even though they're hard. But I can promise you, they're much harder after something happens and everybody's emotional and everybody's scared and nobody knows what to do. At least if you have those conversations early when you're making the bed, even though they're hard, at least you have some kind of a baseline because I can promise you, you don't really know what they want until they tell
Yeah.
you, until you have those conversations. And so we should be having them with each other for with our kids. We should be having them with our siblings. We should be having them with our parents. We should be having them, and we should have them every once in a while. When you're driving down the road is a great time to have that conversation because you got nothing else to do. But it does provide you with some good insight, so that you kind of at least know absolutely mom would not have wanted that. In fact,
Yeah.
she got intubated one time after an event, and she had told us that should never happen again. We had no say in it, but the minute they took that tube out of her, she let us have it. She was mad. And I thought, you think we're not going to do what you want, Mom? We had nothing to say. It wasn't, I love you. What happened? It was, I told you I didn't want to be intubated. Fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I, you're right on the conversations on having 100% on having those hard conversations, those tough conversations. It's funny. I think somewhere along the line, we we've been taught to just kind of, we shy away from the uncomfortable. We're like, yeah, we'll talk about it later. We'll sweep it under the rug, or hopefully we never actually ever have to talk about that. So let's just not talk about it when we should obviously, like you said, do the opposite. So moving on through the book, this one obviously kind of takes me took me by surprise. And you're talking about, you know, you've gone, I don't want to spoil it for the readers, so I'm just going to read this. I also tend to dismiss or diminish my life experiences. I never think about my life as being anything particularly remarkable. It just was what it was, or is what it is. And I've heard you say those words just in normal conversations, like I mean, I don't really see myself as anything but just me. What I've done is just it's what has happened to me. And in my mind, when I see you, I'm like, oh, it's a badass warrior, right? Trump cancer, a couple different times, like whooped its ass, like look at you now, like I got a book and all that. You're look at you now, right? And you're like, it happened. And I smile because I can't wrap my head around that. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Beat cancer. Yeah. So walk us through, excuse me, a little bit about that mentality. And is it still with you? I mean, was at the time of the book, or sorry, at the time of the story that you're talking about in the book. Um, is that still the case?
Sometimes it is, though I will tell you, the book is about my transformational journey of where I came from and a lot of work that I did once I lost all the weight and tried to make sense out of why I make the decisions I make, what things did I need to really change, what did I have to look at, because I knew if I didn't do any of that internal work, nothing was going to change. Because I could have gone on every diet in the world and did. I could have tried every new exercise program and have. And ultimately I would be successful, and then I would gain it all back. And I realized because I wasn't changing what was really important to change, which was how I felt about myself and how I saw myself and why I didn't respect myself as much as I should have been respecting myself, and why I self-soothed with food in the first place. And so this really was talking all about, all of the things I've been figuring out through therapy, through working with coaches, through just the process of having to become really honest with myself as to, you know, let's be honest, why are you eating again? Are you hungry? No, of course not. All right. What's wrong? Why are you needing to feel better? Why do you need a dopamine hit?
Yeah.
Those are hard things to address, especially by yourself. And I'm not saying you can't do it by yourself. Ultimately, we have to do the work. It does help to work with therapists and counselors and coaches, because so much of this stuff we're too close to. But I started doing a bunch of work, and I realized, and I knew I'd done this because my mom told me. And she was way smarter than I ever had been. But I knew that anything I could, and I always had high goals, always had high goals. But if I achieved them, no matter what they were, ultimately, because I had pretty low self-esteem, partly due to the weight, but partly due to other factors. If I could achieve it, then it clearly was not that big of a deal in the first place, right? So I got my PhD.
Not a big deal. Not a big
No,
deal.
no big deal from one of the top programs in the country. I was 40 when I graduated, and I was stage 4 cancer, had gotten diagnosed the second time while I was going through my PhD. And I get my diploma, and I'm like, all right, cool. What's next? And so I I really didn't start doing a lot of this work until I was in my late 50s. And I finally started to figure out that, this was all tied back to self-esteem and self-worth, because one of the things I write about in the book is the talk about it, having epiphanies when you're, working on this is they come out of everywhere when you least expect them. But one of the things that I had to grapple with was the fact that I had spent most of my life putting a significant amount of effort into helping other people achieve their goals and achieve their dreams, and not mine. I would not put the same effort and energy into mine because I did not think I deserved that. And I did
Yeah.
all that for other people, because when you're overweight, when you're obese, you don't have the luxury most of the time, or at least many of us don't feel like we can cause trouble. Like we can't make waves because we want people to hang out with us and like us and be our friends. And so we have to people please. And so that's what I did for many, 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 many years. It wasn't until I really started digging deep that I realized that my life was as valuable as anybody else's. It didn't matter what the number on the scale said. My life was just as valuable as anyone else's, and it deserved the same respect and attention that everybody else's life did. And what had the biggest shift for me was, prior to working on all this stuff, it would have been very difficult for me to ask anyone to do something that would inconvenience them. But once I started getting a handle on all of these issues and I started addressing them, I learned how to say, you know what, that's not going to work for me. I would do it very nicely, but I had to learn how to say, no, this is what I need instead of that. And I realized I had no problem going out of my way for other people. I just assumed they would not go out of their way for me. And I was wrong. And I shouldn't have had to lose weight to figure that out. They would have done it anyway. And if they hadn't, I would have known I wasn't that important to them. but I was afraid to find those things out. So, yes, I diminished anything that I achieved because I didn't feel I was worthy of the achievement, even if I did it. Obviously, it was really easy, or I could not have done it. So I was always diminishing my value. I don't do that anymore. I promise
No,
you, I do not do that anymore.
that's awesome, and I'm glad I'm glad that you don't do that anymore. And that kind of actually that kind of leads me segues perfectly into my last page here that I absolutely love. Um, and it kind of goes off of what you just said. I don't you're working on doing things for me, and I deserve this. My life is worth just as valuable as anybody else's, and I'm worth doing these things for me. And you say here at the last sentence of 131, I am becoming unapologetically me, who, by the way, is pretty damn awesome. And I'm that's a perfect way to kind of wrap this whole thing up because Gretchen, you are pretty damn awesome. And I will say that my life and my walk has been better because you are in it. And so I want to thank you once again for writing the work in between. Thank you for sending this to me. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for being here with us today. Um, it means more to me than you know.
Oh, I appreciate that. One of the things I will say that I want people to know about this book is that I wrote everything from a place of truth. And I
Mm.
talked about the places I failed and the places where I've succeeded. This is not one of those books where I just talk about all the great things, because I felt I had to be as honest as I could. Because if I wasn't, then what was the point of writing a book? And it's not a self-help book. I hope people see something in it that resonates, will help them start their own journey. Because while it's really, really hard, it is so worth it. It is so worth it. And I think if other people learn how to step out of their shadows, it will completely turn your life around. Not because of anything I did, but anything that you do. If people read it with that intent, I'll be really happy. But thank you for having me on the show. We always have really interesting conversations.
We sure do. Absolutely. I'm honored that you came on the show. And Gretchen, real quick, for the audience that definitely needs to connect with you, what social media platforms are you on? How can they connect with you?
The easiest way to get me, I'm on LinkedIn, so just look for Gretchen Holmes, Holmes, and I'm there. I also have a website that's GretchenHolmesPhD.com, and there are links to my book on there. I had a podcast for a couple years. Hopefully, I'll get that going again. But that's they can send me a note through either of those, and I'm happy to hear from them. I love hearing from folks.
I'm absolutely positive that there will be several individuals on here that will be reaching out to you, Gretchen. And once again, audience, listen. Okay, you got to get the book. So go to Amazon, read and then read the book, then leave the review. Make sure you leave the review and make sure that you get Gretchen on your roster. I promise you, personally speaking, you will be better for it, having her connection. Gretchen, thank you so very much for being in my world and for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
All right, audience, we'll see you out there.